In the summer of 1683, the fate of an entire continent hung by a single city wall. If Vienna fell, Europe would fall with it. An empire that stretched across 3 continents stood at the gates of the West. Its armies undefeated, its confidence unshaken, its leaders certain that destiny itself was on their side. But history does not always turn on strength alone. Sometimes it turns on arrogance, on hesitation, on a single, invisible mistake. This is not the story of a powerful weapon. This is the story of a decision that shattered the Ottoman dream of Europe and reshaped the modern world forever. Stay with us until the end, because the real secret weapon of the Battle of Vienna was not forged in fire. It was forged in the human mind. The air smells of smoke, not the clean smoke of a campfire, but the bitter, choking stench of gunpowder mixed with blood. Across the rolling plains outside Vienna, tens of thousands of tents stretch to the horizon. Flags ripple in the wind, green banners marked with gold calligraphy, symbols of an empire that has conquered kings and crushed kingdoms. Drums beat in the distance. Slow, measured, unstoppable. This is not just an army. This is the Ottoman war machine. And in 1683, it has come for Vienna. By the late 17th century, the Ottoman Empire was not merely powerful, it was dominant. At its height, the empire controlled vast territories across Southeast Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Eastern Europe. From the gates of Persia to the shores of the Mediterranean, from the deserts of Arabia to the plains of Hungary, the Ottomans ruled with military efficiency and administrative sophistication unmatched by most of their rivals. European courts spoke of the Ottomans with fear, and with reason. For more than 2 centuries, Ottoman armies had pushed relentlessly westward. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen. Fortresses once thought impregnable were reduced to rubble by Ottoman cannons. Entire regions were absorbed into the empire with terrifying speed. Constantinople, once the mighty capital of the Byzantine Empire, had fallen in 1453. That single event sent shockwaves through Christian Europe, a warning that no city, no matter how ancient or fortified, was truly safe. And now, more than 200 years later, the Ottomans stood before Vienna. The question was not whether they were strong enough to take the city. The question was whether anyone could stop them. The Ottoman military was unlike anything Europe had ever faced. At its core stood the Janissaries, elite infantry soldiers trained from childhood, taken as boys from Christian families, converted to Islam, and raised solely to serve the Sultan. They were professional soldiers long before Europe adopted standing armies. They were paid regularly. They were drilled relentlessly, and they were loyal to the state above all else. Alongside them rode the Sipahi cavalry, heavily armed horsemen who struck with speed and precision, overwhelming enemy flanks before defenders could react. And then there was the artillery. Ottoman cannons were legendary. These were the same weapons that had shattered the walls of Constantinople, walls that had resisted sieges for 1,000 years. Stone fortifications across Europe trembled at the sound of Ottoman guns. Where Ottoman armies marched, resistance usually collapsed. So when news spread in 1683 that an enormous Ottoman force was moving toward Vienna, panic followed. Because Vienna was not just another city. Vienna was the key to Europe. Vienna stood at the crossroads of Europe. It guarded the Danube River, one of the continent's most vital trade and military arteries. It served as a gateway between Eastern and Western Europe, a natural choke point that controlled movement, commerce, and power. For the Holy Roman Empire, Vienna was a shield. For the Ottomans, it was a prize beyond measure. If Vienna fell, the road into the heart of Europe would lie open. German states, Italian territories, even France itself could eventually face Ottoman armies without a natural barrier to stop them. More importantly, Vienna held symbolic value. Its fall would send a message to all of Christendom. No city is safe. No power can resist us. That message alone could cause kingdoms to surrender without a fight. And the man tasked with delivering that message believed history was already on his side. At the head of the Ottoman expedition stood Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha. He was not a sultan, but in practice, he wielded immense power. As Grand Vizier, he commanded the army in the Sultan's name, making decisions that would shape the fate of empires. Kara Mustafa was ambitious, intelligent, and dangerously confident. He did not see Vienna as merely another conquest. He saw it as his legacy. If he could take Vienna, intact and glorious, he would surpass the great Ottoman commanders of the past. His name would be remembered alongside legends. His power within the empire would be unchallenged, and that ambition would shape every decision he made, including the ones that would ultimately doom his campaign. The Ottoman army that marched toward Vienna was massive. Modern estimates place its strength between 150,000 and 200,000 soldiers, a force so large it strained supply lines across hundreds of miles. The march itself was an operation of staggering scale. Engineers prepared roads. Supply caravans followed endlessly. Cooks, medics, craftsmen, and laborers accompanied the soldiers. It was not just an army, it was a moving city. As the Ottomans advanced through Hungary, resistance crumbled. Smaller fortresses fell quickly. Local forces either fled or surrendered. The path to Vienna lay open. By July 1683, the Ottoman army stood before the city's walls. And Vienna was not ready. Vienna's defenses were outdated. Its walls had been designed for earlier wars, not for the sustained artillery bombardment the Ottomans could unleash. Repairs were incomplete. Supplies were limited. Inside the city, there were fewer than 15,000 defenders, soldiers, militia, and civilians pressed into service. Food was scarce. Disease spread quickly. Morale waned. Yet surrender was not an option. The city's commander, Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, understood what Ottoman rule could mean. He had seen other cities fall. He knew what awaited Vienna if the Ottomans entered unopposed. So he made a choice. Vienna would resist, no matter the cost. On July 14, 1683, the siege of Vienna officially began. Ottoman artillery roared. Cannonballs slammed into the city's walls. Buildings shook, streets filled with dust and debris. But Kara Mustafa ordered restraint. He did not want Vienna destroyed. He wanted it preserved. Its wealth, its buildings, its prestige. Instead of overwhelming the city with full artillery power, the Ottomans turned to a slower, more methodical approach. They began digging. Sappers tunneled beneath the walls, planting explosives designed to collapse fortifications from below. Each successful detonation brought the city closer to collapse. Inside Vienna, defenders worked day and night to counter the tunnels, digging their own passages, listening for enemy movements beneath the earth, fighting brutal underground battles in total darkness. Every day, the walls weakened. Every day, the defenders grew more exhausted. And every day, Kara Mustafa waited. He believed time was on his side. He was wrong. While Vienna fought for survival, messages raced across Europe. Envoys pleaded for help. Messengers crossed mountains and rivers, carrying desperate warnings. The Ottomans believed Europe was too divided to respond. They underestimated the fear Vienna's fall would inspire. Slowly, painfully, an alliance began to form. But Kara Mustafa dismissed the threat. He had an enormous army. He controlled the battlefield, and he believed Vienna would fall before any relief force could arrive. That belief, more than any weapon, would shape the fate of the siege. Because as the Ottomans waited, Europe was moving. By late August, Vienna was bleeding. Entire sections of the walls were cracked. Food supplies were nearly gone. The defenders knew they could not hold out much longer. Kara Mustafa stood on a hill overlooking the city, convinced victory was inevitable. But beyond the forests and mountains to the west, something was coming. An army unlike any the Ottomans had faced before, and with it the beginning of the end. While the Ottoman camp slept in confidence, Europe did not sleep. Beyond the forests and mountains west of Vienna, horses were pushed past exhaustion. Messengers rode through rain, darkness, and broken roads, carrying words that weighed more than armor. Vienna was still standing, and as long as Vienna stood, hope remained. For months, Europe had been divided by rivalry, religion, and old grudges. Kings distrusted one another. Princes protected their own borders. Alliances collapsed almost as quickly as they formed. But the siege of Vienna changed everything. Because this was no longer about politics. This was about survival. If Vienna fell, the Ottomans would not stop at Austria. They would move deeper into the heart of Europe, into German lands, toward Italy, toward powers that had once believed themselves safely distant from the eastern frontier. Every ruler who understood history knew the truth. Empires rarely stop themselves. They are stopped, but they keep expanding. And the Ottomans were still expanding. Inside the Ottoman camp, Kara Mustafa Pasha saw no reason to hurry. From his perspective, the situation was simple. Vienna was surrounded. Its walls were damaged. Its defenders were starving. Time was working for him. Every day, the city weakened. Every day, resistance became more fragile. Every day, surrender felt closer. So Kara Mustafa waited. He believed that patience would deliver him a victory worthy of legend. What he did not realize was that patience, at this moment, was becoming his greatest weakness. The Ottomans had the numbers. They had the artillery. They had the experience. But they were fighting a siege as if the outside world no longer existed. And that assumption would prove catastrophic. History often remembers battles as clashes of steel and fire. But the Battle of Vienna was shaped by something far quieter. Delay, hesitation, confidence stretched just slightly too far. Kara Mustafa did not unleash the full destructive power of his artillery. He did not flatten Vienna the way earlier Ottoman armies had flattened cities before them. Why? Because he wanted the city intact. Vienna was not meant to be rubble. It was meant to be a prize. Its palaces, its wealth, its political significance, all of it was supposed to strengthen Kara Mustafa's position within the empire. So instead of crushing the city quickly, he chose a slower, more careful approach. And in war, time is never neutral. Time always favors someone. As the Ottomans waited, Vienna resisted. Every night, defenders repaired damaged walls under torchlight. Every explosion was followed by frantic countermeasures. Every breach was filled with bodies, wood, stone, anything that could slow the enemy. Starvation stalked the city, but surrender did not come. And beyond the Ottoman lines, Europe was organizing. In Poland, King Jan III Sobieski read reports from Vienna with growing alarm. Sobieski was not a man who ruled from behind walls. He was a soldier, a commander who believed that kingship meant responsibility, not comfort. He understood what Vienna represented. If the city fell, Poland would not be safe for long. Neither would the Holy Roman Empire. Neither would any state that stood between the Ottomans and the Atlantic. This was not Austria's war anymore. It was Europe's. Slowly, painfully, alliances began to form. Forces from Poland, Bavaria, Saxony, and other German states agreed to set aside differences. They gathered men, weapons, and supplies with urgency born of fear. It was not a massive army by Ottoman standards, but it was disciplined, and more importantly, it was moving fast. Kara Mustafa received reports of European forces mobilizing. He dismissed them. He believed they would arrive too late. He believed Vienna would fall before any relief army could reach the city. And perhaps, under different circumstances, he would have been right. But history does not reward assumptions. Inside the Ottoman camp, victory felt inevitable. There were celebrations. There was comfort. There was certainty. The siege had dragged on, but nothing suggested disaster. Vienna was cracking. Its defenses could not last forever. Yet something subtle was happening. The urgency that once defined Ottoman campaigns was fading. Commanders grew cautious. Orders slowed. Opportunities passed without action. Kara Mustafa controlled everything too tightly. He feared losing the city to chaos. He feared disappointing the Sultan. He feared a victory that looked less glorious than he imagined. So he waited. And every hour he waited allowed something dangerous to grow beyond the horizon. By early September, Vienna was barely holding together. Explosions had torn massive gaps into the walls. Defenders fought hand-to-hand at breaches, pushing attackers back with desperation rather than strength. But the Ottomans had not delivered the final blow. They believed the city was already dead. They simply had not buried it yet. That belief would haunt them. On the night of September 11th, fires burned across the hills north of Vienna. To the Ottomans, they meant little. To Vienna's defenders, they meant everything. Signals, movement, relief, hope. Across the hills of the Kahlenberg, European forces assembled in silence. Polish, Austrian, and German troops took position under cover of darkness. Cavalry units prepared horses that would soon carry them into history. Among them stood one of the most feared formations in early modern warfare, the Winged Hussars, heavy cavalry, armored, disciplined, and terrifying in motion. Their wings, wooden frames adorned with feathers, were not decoration alone. When they charged, the sound they produced cut through the battlefield like something unnatural. Many who heard it believed angels or demons were descending upon them. The Ottomans had never faced anything like it. As dawn approached on September 12th, Kara Mustafa still believed the battle was his to control. He expected Vienna to collapse. He did not expect an army to descend from the hills. He did not expect the siege to turn into a field battle. And he did not expect that his greatest advantage, time, had already slipped from his grasp. The sun rose over Vienna on a day that would decide the fate of empires. For weeks, the Ottomans had pressed forward without urgency. Now urgency had found them. Steel would soon replace strategy. Speed would replace patience. And hesitation would become fatal. Because what Kara Mustafa had mistaken for caution. September 12th, 1683. Dawn broke slowly over Vienna. For weeks, the city had survived on exhaustion, hunger, and hope that bordered on madness. Its walls were cracked. Its defenders were wounded. Its streets were filled with people who no longer believed tomorrow was guaranteed. This morning was different. This morning would decide everything. Inside the city, soldiers stood at their posts, knowing there would be no retreat. If Vienna fell today, it would fall forever. There would be no second chance, no relief, no mercy outside the walls. The Ottoman camp prepared for what Kara Mustafa still believed would be the final phase of a siege, not a decisive battle. That belief would cost him everything. As the sun climbed higher, movement stirred in the forests and hills north of the city. Ottoman scouts reported enemy forces, not scattered units, not raiding parties, an army. Kara Mustafa hesitated. He had not planned for a full-scale field battle. His army was positioned for siege warfare, stretched across vast encampments, focused on tunnels and bombardments, not rapid maneuver or sudden confrontation. Still, he believed the Ottomans could handle whatever approached. They had always done so before. European forces descended from the hills in stages. First came infantry, Austrian, German, and Allied troops moving deliberately, pressing the Ottoman left flank. Their goal was not immediate victory, but pressure, to force engagement, to disrupt Ottoman positioning. The Ottomans responded with discipline. Janissary units advanced, holding ground with professionalism earned through decades of war. For hours, the battlefield turned into a grinding contest of endurance. Smoke filled the air. Musket fire echoed across the plains. Artillery thundered from both sides. Neither side broke. This was not the battle Kara Mustafa wanted. He had envisioned Vienna surrendering, intact, obedient, a jewel added to the empire. Instead, he was being dragged into a confrontation on terrain he had not chosen, at a time he had not prepared for. Still, he delayed. He kept his reserve forces back. He waited for the European attack to weaken itself. He believed patience would restore control. But patience had already failed him once. As the battle intensified, reports flooded Kara Mustafa's command tent. The left flank was under pressure. The center was holding, but barely. European forces were growing stronger, not weaker. Yet still, he hesitated. He feared committing too much too soon. He feared chaos. He feared losing the city to destruction rather than conquest. History does not forgive such fear. By late afternoon, the battlefield had reached a breaking point. It happened. From the heights of the Kahlenberg, A sound rolled across the valley, low, rhythmic, and unmistakable. Hooves, thousands of them. The ground trembled. European infantry began to pull aside, opening lanes down the hillside. And from the forest emerged a sight few Ottoman soldiers had ever imagined. Armored cavalry surged forward, Poland's elite Winged Hussars. Their armor gleamed in the fading light. Their lances stretched forward like a forest of steel. And rising from their backs were enormous feathered wings, designed not for decoration, but for terror. As they charged, the wings caught the wind, producing a roar unlike anything on the battlefield. To many watching, it sounded unnatural, as if something beyond human had been unleashed. King Jan III Sobieski rode at the front. He did not command from behind. He led. With a raised sword, he gave the signal, and the largest cavalry charge in recorded history began. More than 20,000 horsemen thundered downhill at full speed. The Ottoman line shattered, not from lack of courage, but from shock. Formations broke apart. Commands were lost. Coordination vanished. Janissaries fought fiercely, but even discipline has limits when the ground itself seems to be charging at you. Within minutes, the siege had become chaos. What had taken months to build collapsed in hours. Kara Mustafa attempted to regain control. Orders were sent. Messengers ran, but it was too late. The battlefield no longer belonged to him. The momentum, the one force he had underestimated, had turned against him. As the sun sank toward the horizon, the Ottoman army began to withdraw. What started as a retreat quickly became a rout. Tents were abandoned. Cannons were left behind. Supplies meant to feed an empire were seized by its enemies. Vienna was saved. By nightfall, the Ottoman army had fully retreated. Inside the city, bells rang through shattered streets. Survivors wept, not in triumph, but in disbelief. They had lived. Against all odds, Vienna had held. The consequences of that day reached far beyond Austria. The Ottoman advance into Europe was broken. Never again would the empire come so close to reshaping the continent's future. Never again would it stand at the gates of Western Europe with such overwhelming force. The balance of power had shifted. Kara Mustafa Pasha fided. Within months, he would be executed, strangled on the orders of his own empire, blamed for a defeat that history would remember as both tragic and inevitable. His greatest failure was not lack of strength. It was delay. The Battle of Vienna was not decided by numbers alone. It was not decided by weapons alone. It was decided by timing, by leadership, and by the human tendency to believe that control lasts longer than it does. The Ottomans were powerful. They were disciplined. They were experienced. But power without urgency becomes fragile. And confidence, when left unchecked, becomes blindness. Vienna did more than survive. It marked the moment when expansion turned into defense. When an empire that had advanced for centuries was finally forced to look inward. History remembers this battle not as the fall of the Ottomans, but as the moment their momentum died. History is not shaped only by victories. It is shaped by hesitation, by the moments when leaders wait too long, act too late, and mistake patience for wisdom. The Battle of Vienna reminds us of a simple truth. The most dangerous weapon in history is not steel or fire. It is the belief that time will always wait. If you want more stories like this, stories that reveal how empires rise, fall, and break under their own decisions, stay with us, because history never truly ends. It only waits to be repeated.